All right, welcome everybody. This is our afternoon session. I'm Sam Ransbotham again, professor at analytics at Boston College, and this is our session on new jobs. In the morning we were talking about existing jobs, and we got a great panel to talk about that. Brandon's the VP of Programming at NTK Networks, which is an IT consultancy in Maryland, mostly around cybersecurity, which is near and dear to my heart. He's got a background in the U.S. Navy for a decade, U.S. Naval Academy. No overlap with me on that, so I really can't make a common connection there. I guess you're teaching some too, though, so there's a bond.
There is.
A little bit of bond.
Yeah.
All right, Karen Kimbrough, the chief economist at LinkedIn, fascinating history. She actually is an economist through and through, starting at Stanford, then at Harvard Kennedy for policy, and then at Oxford, where Carl's there now. And then Morgan Stanley for a while, Federal Reserve for a decade, Bank of America for a while, Google, and now at LinkedIn. Finally, Katya Walsh, our journalist by training back in the day, but now has been at Forrester Research, has been at Fidelity, Vodafone, Prudential, and I met her when she was at Levi Strauss for about 5 years, if I remember correctly, but now for the last year and a half has been the Chief Digital Officer at Harvard Business School. Good. In 1988, the Bureau of Labor Statistics made some predictions about jobs of the future. Gas station attendants, going to be big. Travel agents were going to be huge. And why? It made sense, because there's discretionary income. We were all going to be able to travel. They didn't say anything about HTML developers, which in 2 years was an exploding task, and programmers and artificial intelligence. It's really difficult to know what new jobs are going to come, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Katya, you've had a lot of jobs in your past. You should have some expertise. What is the new job? What are new jobs in the future going to hold for us?
Well, first of all, the jobs that we're going to have in the future, we can't train for them now. We just don't know what they are, and that's what I tell my children. I have one who just graduated college and another one who is getting into junior year. So I've always told them, pick up skills, but don't study for a job, because that will change. I could have never imagined 100 years ago when I was studying to be an investigative reporter that I would end up in technology and artificial intelligence. But we already see new jobs that are specifically shepherded here by the advent of artificial intelligence. By the way, I have to tell you, I'm so happy that ChatGPT entered the household language, because when I was at Levi Strauss & Company, when Sam first met me, people would say, why would Levi's need a chief AI officer? And I would try to tell them, well, you have to optimize supply chain and personalize marketing, and of course make sure we were even using generative AI for copy and visuals and ads. But it would take a long time to explain. Now, nobody asks, why would a company need a chief AI officer? But that is one example of a new role, even though I happened to hold it earlier. And one that I think I've never seen until, well, I haven't seen, but I think will happen is an AI ombudsman. And I know that ombudsman because that is from my journalism days. An ombudsman used to be someone that readers could raise an issue with, file a complaint, and that would be an independent, objective party that would look at the history of the issue, perhaps create some kind of an investigation, but very quickly come up with some kind of a, not a verdict, but some kind of a result or an outcome. And I believe we're headed toward that new type of role within the realm of AI, because there will have to be some kind of a human arbiter when we are going to be so dominated by and dependent on AI. And while today we are in the age of AI augmenting human jobs, I believe that not too long in the future, we will be in the age of humans augmenting AI jobs.
Big change. Actually, on a panel, you always try to get people to give specific answers, and usually people are evasive or whatever, but bang, right out of the gate with a specific job title. I can give you 100 points just for that. you're cheating though, Karen. You've got an insight into data that we've never had before. The idea that you can see what's going on. All right.
Sure. Okay.
Tell us.
All right, well, first I'll say I also had to explain to my mom why there's a chief economist at LinkedIn. She was like, Mom. She was happy for me, but not convinced. All right, so jobs. We do indeed see a lot of jobs. Some of the new ones that are popping up include AI protection analysts, so someone who's sort of protecting their membership, say, from what AI may or may not do, maybe close to the idea of an ombudsman in a newspaper. We see things like AI design engineer, so someone who is, and this, by the way, I should say AI art design engineer, so looking for someone to create art with AI. We see another job is something around responsible use for AI. So those jobs are starting to crop up. In the last 5 years or so, we've seen a big increase in head of AI roles, just generally, across our 1 billion members. So these are coming from very small numbers, but rapid growth. So we're seeing titles like that. What I would say, though, is there's probably more change happening in job titles that are the same than new jobs cropping up. So we are seeing jobs crop up. If I look at the fastest growing jobs on our platform, like say the top 20 fastest growing jobs over the last 5 years, 2/3 of them did not exist 20 years ago. So there's always new jobs being created, to your point. AI is now the new flavor. But what is more interesting to us is watching how a job like an economist on my team is using their time differently and spending more time in GitHub and things like that, saying, oh, I coded this in R, but now I need it in Python. Go fix that for me. And so we're seeing tasks rotate even in jobs that still exist.
Yeah, so you just started to make the transition from job to task. What skills are people going to need, Brandon?
Non-technical skills.
Oh, well, no, that's tragic.
Yeah,
I've just spent a whole lot of years developing a bunch of technical skills.
And I'm an engineer, and so that hurts me to say that. We tend to think that AI is going to bring an influx of technical need to the workforce, but actually what it's going to create, and I think we saw this in Chris's presentation, which is what are those core skills at the bottom of that pyramid? And those core skills are the skills that you learn from a good liberal arts education: creative thinking, design thinking, systems thinking. These are integrative skills that allow an individual to draw meta-analyses and meta-connections between things that we typically wouldn't find connections between. And that will allow that individual to take full advantage of the power and what I see of as a performance-enhancing drug that is AI.
As a professor at a liberal arts college, I feel like I have to agree there. But one of the things that that bothers me, all right, let me just argue a little bit, that bothers me that if we have to say that everybody has to know everything, that's not a good solution. If you have to know technical and, I think you mentioned responsibility or ethics, these types of things, how do we find this purple squirrel that out there that knows how to do all these things at the same time? I think if I listed a job on LinkedIn that required me to know machine learning and have a philosophy degree and whatever, how many hits would I get? Not many.
Not many.
Not many, right? So how do we get around this issue then? What kind of skills is it that we're going to need that help us pull all these things and integrate them together?
Well, the easy answer that I think we would all go is you kind of need to lean into that lifelong learning idea. You need to be a constant learner, a picker-upper of new technologies. I think I would tend to agree with you, Brandon, that the skills that we see as being most useful are the combination of hard and soft skills. So when you look at someone on our platform who has not demonstrated many soft skills, they don't get promoted as fast as those who are saying they have both hard and soft skills. Of course, I can't tell you that they definitely have those skills, but when people say they have both, they get promoted faster than people who only have the technical skills. So it speaks a little bit to that. So we see promotion rates differ amongst members who have different sets of skills. And if you have skills around organization, problem solving, ethical trade-offs, all the things that you were, I think, getting at, that are the human value add, those have an even faster rate of promotion. So people who bring those humanist of human skills do the best in terms of promotion, if you want to measure it that way.
And if
Go
I
ahead.
can, to your point of the individuals who find the most success, I kind of take issue with your framing.
Good.
Which is our economy doesn't care about what's fair. Right? Of course, we'd like everyone to have an opportunity, sure, but the people who will get the most out of this are the people who do have all of those skills, who do have the ability to integrate those things. I mean, I watched a lot of the Olympics this summer. I am never going to win the 100-meter dash, right? Like, I am not a sprinter. I will never beat Noah Lyles in my entire life. No matter how many performance-enhancing drugs I take, I will never sprint faster than Noah Lyles, right? Just like in the workforce, my best employees, if they use the performance-enhancing drug, though, if the person who got 6th place at the Olympics uses that drug, they're going to win gold. They're going to beat Noah Lyles. So my best performers, those who use AI, those who can integrate technical with soft skills, are going to take all and win, and my lowest performers are going to get left further and further behind.
And how technical do you need to be, right? I mean, at some level, some of this is just accessing something that could be on your phone or your laptop, so it doesn't require necessarily the highest level of technical expertise.
True.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I don't really know what that means for us in education. What do we teach people then?
So I would say that what I just heard, that's nothing new. That's not based on AI or because of AI. That has always been the case. Those who have both the communication skills and the technical skills tend to do better, because if you have the typical engineer, and forgive me, typical engineers, but we usually have to train typical engineers in communication, and then when you do that, miracles happen and the outcome is even greater. But I think what we can be most successful in terms of helping our students and professionals achieve is critical thinking, because that will be absolutely imperative with AI. And I'll give you an example. At Harvard Business School, we are developing a whole new system of tutor bots and mentor bots and assignment feedback bots in a differentiated proprietary system. Why are we doing this ourselves? Not because we can, but because we need to. There's only so much today that off-the-shelf tools can give you in terms of accuracy and meeting the standards that Harvard Business School has. As you know, it's not just hallucinations problems, but we also don't want to be tied to what happens to be the best model of the day that may not be the best model of tomorrow. And I often say you would not hire a teaching assistant who is right 66% of the time. Why would you do that with an automated tool? So we are developing this proprietary system. And in that system, when you ask a question, the tutor bot would give you an answer, but then we invoke another tool, another bot that criticizes the answer of the answer bot. But how do we make sure that the critic is not hallucinating, right? So you do ultimately need to have a human, not just the proverbial human in the loop, but a human who can be the ultimate, again, arbiter of what is correct and what's not.
And that makes sense, I think, in maybe the educational settings we're familiar with in Georgetown, and this makes sense. What about maybe the rest of the world that is not as interested in learning everything about AI as it comes out and reading everything that comes out? Do we have enough awareness? Do we need to push for more awareness outside of HBS and outside of LinkedIn and outside of NTK Networks?
Go ahead.
So I think the change is happening incredibly fast, and yet still going to take a very long time to filter through all the jobs. So I say fast because I'm looking at the diffusion across industries that we track on LinkedIn. I say fast because I see the adoption rates of members and employers who are putting job postings out. What are the skills they're looking for? And so I see these incredibly fast growth rates, but it's from very small numbers. So I think it's going to take a long time before we see this move through. I'm not worried that people won't adapt. I think they will. But I do think that there's always the risk of the person in the disrupted role that really doesn't pivot easily. And it is hard to pivot. We know this from our own data. It's hard to pivot from one profession to another or from one industry to another. It's getting easier, but it's still incredibly hard. So that will leave people behind as change happens.
Can you quantify that it's easier? Like, have you seen evidence of this? I mean, I'm kind of fascinated by how much
we can.
data you have.
So we can look. So there's 1 billion members. they're not all on at the same time, but there's 1 billion members at LinkedIn, and we can see when they change jobs. And we can see what jobs they changed to, and are they just in the same role, maybe they got promoted to a higher level, are they in the same job, just a different industry, same job in the same company, so we can see how they change. And what we can do is map how much they're actually completely changing their role. Say if I go from being an economist to being a professor or running a business school, the head of, chief digital officer, that would be a complete change. And those changes are happening more frequently than they were in the past. There are still certain professions that change a lot more than other professions, but yeah, we can quantify that. It's small.
Do we need to start public awareness campaigns about AI? I mean, I guess 10 years ago, if you asked me about AI, then probably nobody would have done anything. I'm not so sure that we need public awareness now that we have ChatGPT out there with literally everybody playing with it. But maybe we're just seeing the same people over and over again in our little AI bubble.
Can I add to the answer about the skills that we need the most?
Okay.
What you just made me think about, Karen, is that the other kind of skill that's hard to teach, but really, really imperative, is adaptability. Mm-hmm. And we do remember Darwin, right? It's not the strongest of the species that will survive. It's the ones who are most adaptable. And so if there's anything particularly challenging today is that the change happens so much, and it challenges even the most adaptable of us to do that at a much faster rate. So I don't know about a public awareness campaign, Sam, to answer your question, but I do believe employers have a responsibility to their workforce to help them adapt with the skills, with the reskilling kind of training, whether it's prompt writing or some other ways of picking up, getting to that, what did Carlo talk about, the high exposure. Mm-hmm. We owe it to our colleagues, teams, employees, associates to make sure that they get that high exposure from us so that they can make that change, not because their job will be gone, but so that they can better themselves. And when you and I met, Sam, we were at the time at Levi Strauss & Company making, I would say, history in the retail apparel space with a machine learning bootcamp that was accessible to everyone in the company, including people in distribution centers, in manufacturing, in design, not the typical analysts and engineers that you might think of. And when we trained those people at the time in Python and machine learning and agile ways of working, they upgraded their own jobs. They did not lose their jobs, but they got better jobs themselves, which they themselves made even better and enhanced, and thus the outcome was better for the company as well, but ultimately better.
Well, so I don't remember about that. How did people decide to do this program? How did they know that was an option?
Oh, we promoted it.
You promoted it. So
yes.
There's some sort of, I guess that, would people, go ahead.
Well,
you go first.
To take it one step further, that is competitive advantage for a business. And we're here as the industry representative. So the fact of the matter is this technology integrated into individuals' work, but also teamwork, business process improvement, supply chain management, all those different aspects of a business is here to stay. This is not a fad. It's not going to go away. It is here to stay. If a business wants to take advantage of this great technology, incorporate it into their employees' operations and their business operations and their structures, that is kind of the answer of who, right? Who and why.
So that's a more corporate and private versus more public, I guess, than I was originally thinking. But I guess you're relying on the invisible hand to work.
The public's interest here is if we want to limit the downside, which is that stratification of those who are excellent moving further up the chain and those who are less excellent because human performance is not equally distributed, falling further and further behind, then the public should advocate for training and education and awareness as well. Those folks might still fall behind, but they wouldn't fall as far behind.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that. I agree. So what we see in our data is a large percentage of job seekers or employees really want to be upskilled and trained in AI. They know it's there. They know it can make them more productive.
Okay.
And they know that using these things will give them back more time that they may choose to go home early and empty the dishwasher. They may not want to do more work, but they will definitely have more time. So we see about almost, when we do a survey, this is just a survey, but do a survey of, say, 10,000 members, some 80% of them say, yeah, I've been playing around with AI or generative AI already. When we ask, well, did your employer help you? No. So there's about, employers think they're doing a lot, but they're lagging behind. And so only about 40% of employers have really gotten going in terms of thinking, how do I introduce this as a business process? The generative AI tool that I need for my finance arm is not the same as the tool I'm going to need for HR or need for operations or need for engineering. And so it's all these different aspects and applications of generative AI that haven't yet been figured out. They don't understand the risks. And so they're lagging behind all these employees that are ready to use it because they think it's going to save them time and make them more productive.
Talk about the job opportunity in the future. I mean, my problem, I run a business, 42 employees. My business looks like most businesses in America. I want my business to become AI native. I want all of our processes to be enabled by AI. For 2 years, I've been working on that. We're still not.
But how are you doing that? So I'll challenge you a little bit, Brandon, because when Levi's decided to train its employees, first of all, it made that training available to all, but it was not for all. It was highly competitive. It was actually very difficult to choose people because we did not want to have prerequisites that would have required people to have an engineering background. We wanted it open to all, but we also wanted people who are analytical, problem solvers, tenacious, resilient, don't give up easily because this is not easy work. And at the same time, we didn't just promote it. We gave these people 8 weeks in which to train. We called it a boot camp for a reason. It was very intense. It was not a summer camp. So employers shouldn't just promote it and say, here, do something with it. They have to enable it and do everything possible because, to your point, it also becomes a competitive advantage for that organization.
And I think that what you just described is extraordinarily hard for most corporations, or at least small to medium sized, to actually invest that type of time and resource. For my organization, we can't take anyone off the job for any meaningful amount of time. So all I can do is say, here are the resources. Here are all the accounts, and everyone can have an enterprise account on ChatGPT, and here are all these specialty tools for various functions. Go forth and discover and create. And maybe 1 or 2 do, and 38, 39 don't. And that's ultimately, I think, the problem where there's an opportunity. Some businesses who figure that out, or hire the people who can help them figure that out as a job opportunity.
It's interesting, right? Because a lot of literature will say the minute you introduce generative AI, it sort of narrows the gap between like let's call it the slowest or lowest performers and the top performers.
Yeah, we saw evidence of that in some earlier presentations, yeah.
Exactly. And then now we're talking about small versus large firms and whether or not we're going to see that narrowing or leveling the competitive playing field between them, because there's always a barrier, right? But there's a barrier to adoption in terms of just time and resources for smaller companies. So I think it's a really interesting point you're raising.
But the beauty of generative AI is it's not like even 2 years ago, we had to give people 8 weeks because it's not easy to learn Python and not easy to figure out the data of the company to solve the problems of the company with that data, knowing Python. Generative AI has completely erased any kind of barriers to entry. It is so easy to use. It's a conversation. We all grow up having conversations. So it does not require that kind of training. So the commitment of an employer is much less ambitious or has to be much lower. And it may be more about expectations rather than enabling. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but there is a difference with Gen AI in the picture.
So I agree with you. I think the barrier to entry in some ways is lower. But I also think that there are scalable issues around, or non-scalable issues maybe around, just like what are the risks to my business for any particular function? If I introduce it to finance, that'll be different than HR. And when you have a big company, you've got a lot of folks who can think about that and be responsible. When you've got a little company, it might just be you having to figure that out piece by piece by piece. I don't know. So I agree with you. Low barriers to entry in terms of adoption, but there's still an element of like, how do you get through all the risk that you want to navigate first?
Well, so that's a whole other question. But
I think it's a barrier for employers, getting going.
Yeah, but that's a good question no matter whether we're talking about jobs or a company implementing the generative AI strategy, the first thing that a company or an organization has to do is figure out the risks and put the guardrails in place, such as particular generative AI guidelines or other policies, because if you don't have those protections, you cannot really take advantage of the opportunities that it offers. So yes, I think we're both in agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, so this makes me think about what the role is of, again, ethics and regulation here. That if you've got these sorts of activities, you mentioned them, calling them risks. I might say we've got a very powerful technology. We're going to hand it to a bunch of people. We may give it to them kind of on their own to figure out. We may put them through a boot camp. How do we help them with ethical type dilemmas that we've never faced before? Where does that come into this? How about your boot camp? Did your boot camp talk more about Python or more about ethics?
So that was 2 years ago.
2 years ago,
So
long
much
time
has
ago.
changed in that amount of time. But I mean, ethics always matters, and actually ethics was my favorite topic many years ago. But that's where critical thinking comes into play, because it's not easy answers. It's not a regulation. It goes above and beyond, and I don't know if that's training or real-world examples, but we cannot afford to not cover it somehow. I don't know the best ways. That this type of forum could be one example of that. But it's very interesting. That's why I thought this ombudsman role could be really...
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that ombudsman was kind of the first thing you came out with, when it was not at all what I would have thought our new... When we think about new jobs, I think there's a natural tendency to first think about coding this, coding that, prompt engineering, or hallucination stopping or whatever. But you took it a very different direction there. And I don't think, I go back in my engineering degree, I don't think I had a single philosophy or ethics class. Anything I know about that is more from watching TV probably than watching The Good Place than from any actual training. But you think about then, if these tools become easier, then it makes these other resources more valuable. And so it kind of transitions me into thinking, what's going to be scarce? What's going to be the thing that everybody, if these tools make lots of other things easy, what is scarce? Is it ethics? Is it philosophy? Is it the soft skills? What are these scarce things that we ought to be chasing if the technologies make a lot of other things easier access?
I still think there's a lot of innovation and creativity. I know as much as people say, AI is creative, I think there's a lot of human innovation and creativity that will be relatively scarce. I think the value add for us will be that. It will be the problem solving, the critical thinking, the ethical trade-offs and nuances, because these generative AIs, maybe they're learning really quickly. They can do a lot of different things. They mimic humans in a lot of ways, but are they going to be able to pick up on a particular cultural issue? I mean, LinkedIn is in so many countries, and we have to think about what do the comments look like in the platform feed, and what might be acceptable to say in one country and not in another, because people have different, norms and language uses. And so I do think that at the end of the day, you still are going, as much as you want to train generative AI to mimic us, we're going to be evolving faster in our own innovations and our own culture, that we will always be, I think, ahead of AI. I know that is not what everyone else thinks, but I'm still betting on humans. So I think a lot of it is innovation and creativity, and I think a lot of it is a lot of those ethical trade-offs I mentioned.
Yeah, but those are tough to train.
Yes, I agree. It's not so much what will be scarce, but what will be most important, and that's humanity. I love technology, but I love people more. And I think in the age of AI, that's when we get to stand out more as the species that invented artificial intelligence. And it's our responsibility to also humanize it. And that's part of the training. The more we talk about prompt engineering, the more we talked about the technology, that can intimidate people. We need to humanize it, make it relatable, help people really feel it and understand it, and help our mothers get it. So that's where the humanity comes in.
I thought the ease of tools have helped with that a lot. I mean, Actually, I'm kind of curious, your incoming class right now, how many people have actually built a Python machine learning model before versus how many people have used ChatGPT? I bet there's a very, very different balance in that group of people. So I think we maybe have the awareness. People here,
quick.
go ahead. Yeah, sorry. Think about questions. Think about questions while he's finishing.
I mean, I love that. I mean, there's a lot of optimism here, but I think what's really going to be scarce is effective regulation on this. I think we have not shown ourselves able to effectively regulate these cutting-edge, rapidly iterating technologies within this country. And so
digital copyright law is very much tied to Gutenberg Press. Right?
Yeah, right. And now with Chevron doctrine gone away, that's going to be even more important. So I think that's a call to those in the room who work on policy and regulation. That is what seems to be super scarce, especially when you bring up ethics. If you rely on the better angels of these businesses, you're going to be disappointed every single time. And so you regulate that through law. You drive incentives and you create the ethical outcome you want through law, not through just hoping that Sam Altman is going to do the right thing because he woke up on the right side of the bed today.
So you're coming down pretty strong pro-regulation?
I am, and until it happens, I will take full advantage of the open runway as I can while I run my business.
Okay. Are you similarly interested in regulation?
I think the most interesting thing about AI, and I'm not original in saying this, so I don't want to claim it as my own comment, but it's the fact that we're figuring out, or maybe need to start figuring out the regulation side, figuring out the adoption and applicability of this as a new technology. So everything is happening at the same time. This may not be new, but it's definitely making it confusing. I think the Europeans are ahead of us in terms of figuring out how to at least start to set some boundaries around the use. I think it will come. I think the Europeans will lead us for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with the point that we can't rely on everyone's good graces to do the right thing. Because in a modern world with lots of different players and lots of different places, I mean, I go back to the AI pause a year ago, promoted by people who happened to be ahead of the race at the time, who were all interested in pausing.
Pull up the ladder behind me.
That's Noah saying, all right, everybody stop racing now that I'm ahead. And so that was an interesting thing. And I just don't, clearly nothing came out of that. At the same time, I think it's really hard to regulate these things that are changing so very rapidly. But to preach it a little bit, we've got a history of regulating things that have done well. Part of my background is we're working with the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency about nuclear weapons, and we have not had, I don't want to jinx us here, but we've not had a big nuclear bomb since 1945. So something works. We buy stocks in companies, and we can buy those stocks in companies without having seen the books because we know CPAs have seen the books and we trust them by proxy. We trust the regulatory supply chain to make sure that food processing is safe. And we've got some regulations in there, and we can open up food in a way that we couldn't 100 years ago without, right now there's a listeria outbreak, and it's news. And it's unusual, but it wouldn't have been usual 100 years ago. So the point is, we've got some existing precedent for doing a good job with regulation, and we can't act like AI is magical and special and defies everything we've ever learned in human existence.
That's so true, Sam. I was just reading about the inventor of CRISPR, one of the inventors of CRISPR, Jennifer Doudna, and there has been such analogy, actually, when I was reading the book just a few years ago, there was all this debate about gene editing and how far is it far enough? Is it okay to erase a life-threatening disease, but then where does it stop when you actually start to engineer humans? So AI is not that different in that way. It just happens to be the emerging tech of the day. But I do believe that it will settle. I'm old enough to remember the mainstreaming of the internet and when everything was free and Napster was there and we were all listening to music without having to pay. And there were no taxes on e-commerce orders, and that eventually got settled. So this will also happen here.
The adaptability, back to your adaptability of humans, we figured that out. We can figure other things out. I'm sorry, questions in the audience, please. Anyone named Sam, we'll call him.
Thanks a lot. So, Brandon, you said, until regulation comes, I'm going to take full advantage of the fact that we have this runway or whatever. But I could also imagine that regulation could be helpful in some ways to drive incentives so that it's we can kind of distribute these productivity gains more, allow small businesses to more easily take advantage of the benefits of these systems. Maybe it's investments in public education and things like that. So maybe not regulation, but public policy more broadly. So I wonder if, from like a industry perspective, if there are things that you would like to see from policymakers to help you, like to harness some of the economic benefits of these systems more. If you have any thoughts on that.
Sure, and my comment was more about you can rely on businesses to do one thing, which is optimize profit, right? That's really the only thing that we ever should rely on businesses to do. But to your point, I do think there are opportunities that public policy can drive growth and opportunity. And I mean, you brought up an education program, right? Whether it's through our public university systems, whether it's through non-traditional degree programs, right? Not the standard four-year degree, but kind of that new collar job idea of we have roles that require training and education that can be done in a one-year certificate program. And how do we incentivize that within our national public education, within our national jobs programs, what have you? I think that there's opportunities there. In terms of business and workforce, I would love for the workforce to come in better trained and educated, but I would also just love access to workforces that I can't necessarily get access to. I was recently speaking to Amazon and their data center program, and they've built up this fantastic education program in Appalachia and other areas of this country to train these populations that don't typically get access to high-paying, tech-driven jobs that do not require a four-year degree. So other ways that public policy can drive those types of programs that even small businesses like mine can take advantage of those investments would be greatly valuable.
There's been this isn't quite a public policy, this is more of a corporate policy, but there's been a push, I know, within LinkedIn. And to be honest, it was successful, but it was limited, which was like, do you have to demand all of these degrees when you put out a job posting you want to hire? Mm-hmm. Do you really need all that? Or what if this woman is very capable, 35, and been doing this job for 10 years somewhere else? Does she really need to have a master's? And that has been helpful, I think, in de-degreeing a lot of roles that we see on LinkedIn. We've seen a big decrease since then. And this was particularly prevalent during the pandemic. It's not quite your point. But the other thing I was going to say more to generative AI was, I know that we've put out a certificate course on LinkedIn Learning where you can sort of say, I'm going to get a generative AI certificate. Now, is that going to make you eligible for every generative AI engineering job? No, not at all. But it might make you a little bit more proficient understanding what does a large language model do, why might it be useful to learn about prompt engineering or how to write a prompt that's effective, or to just get you to be more adaptable and persistent in trying to learn and teach yourself. So there are courses like that out there that might help people, but I think there's not enough on-ramps into jobs for people who are coming from non-traditional places, and I would love to see a lot more done there. I'd almost put it back to the education industry, which I think has been slow to reform itself in terms of catching up with where we are.
One way that the federal government can do that is stop requiring four-year college degrees for all of the federal jobs, which they just started doing with some IT-driven jobs, so I think they're moving in that direction. But by doing that, that will kind of open up the aperture, I think, a little bit and give other industries and private industries the permission to also not require. I know that's maybe controversial.
Yeah, this was fun up until we started to.
And Harvard and Boston, and I teach at the Naval Academy, so I also am in higher education. But opening that aperture also requires us to take on that risk ourselves and saying we do not require that anymore.
What you're talking about, Brandon, I think, is the classic dilemma. You have a emerging technology which by its nature is disruptive. And so my career has been all about bringing these emerging technologies to an existing organization to help it stay relevant. And what I've learned is the first thing you do is you break all the rules. You have to break the rules, not because you're a rebel just to be a rebel, but because those old rules no longer apply. And in fact, they impede you from deploying that emerging technology for the benefit of that enterprise. So that kind of open-mindedness and perhaps not even looking at regulation, but looking within the organization and its policies and how those can be relaxed or adapted for the future, that would be a good start.
And small may have an advantage there that the big does not. Please, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the discussion. It's been very interesting. I'm from the World Bank, from the Digital Development, and we're working with clients across the world. And for instance, one of our clients from Ethiopia is particularly interested in deploying AI for the government or public services. I'll be very much interested to learn more about what kind of skill set that we should more like focus on when we nurture the skill set from like Africa or like developing country context. Because I've seen the case in another African countries where we have invested for their digital skills, but when I actually met some of the startups and beneficiaries, they were not really, they couldn't really find the market where they can use those skills that they can use computer and stuff, but they don't know how to actually utilize that in the market context and make profit out of it. So if you can give us some advice on when we work with the clients' countries, like what skill sets should we like really focus on? Like should be coding or like Python, or like for instance, I'm from South Korea, and the government of Korea has actually deployed a measure to teach coding to like elementary school students. So from like 10, 20 years, like majority of the young generation will be able to learn, like know how to do the coding. So for like the developing countries like Africa to have that sort of impact in their nurturing skills, and what kind of a set of skills that should we really focus on we'd like to hear it from the industry's perspective. Thank you.
You want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. So it's definitely true that things like Python seem very popular. It might be different though. The things I learned a long time ago are no longer in heavy use. You know, the coding skills are useful, but again, like I'll give you the example on my team. There are people who code in Python and R, and they sometimes just need it in something else, or it started in SQL, and they're like, oh, let me just throw it in here, and it'll translate it for me into this new coding language. So I don't know how much I would say you have to really nail down a particular coding language, but it's obviously very useful. I think the problem, and I'm just admiring the problem now and not answering it, but is that there isn't, like you said, a market or a critical mass. And so you have maybe some really talented folks, few and far between in one country, but where do they go to have a community amongst themselves? And I'm a big believer in networks. Sitting at LinkedIn, we watch the power of networks and strong networks, and they really do, it's like a flywheel, they feed on them. And I think that's actually the bigger challenge in a lot of emerging markets, is not having that community where people can really find each other and build. But of course, yeah, the coding is useful, as is all the languages. Now let me just give you the list, because I promised I would do it, and then I'll stop and turn it to you. So the list of the most in-demand like AI skills are, and these are not very exciting, but it's like large language models and generative AI and GNN, so neural networks, image, any kind of like imaging, design, things like that, anything to do with video, all of that are the nuts that our people are trying to crack right now.
Yeah, so my belief is that the advent of generative AI has actually relegated coding to a backstage, if not exiting completely, because it can do the coding. It's not perfect yet, but it will. That's why we are seeing, tech jobs actually, tech companies doing layoffs. So my belief is that the skills that could be very useful at this point are around entrepreneurship, especially in the countries that you described. I happen to come from Bulgaria, very different. People may say developing country itself. And how do you teach that? There are different ways, obviously, but that could be something that really helps lift everyone. And that's where technology, including AI, can be very helpful, because it can mentor in entrepreneurship people at unprecedented scale and speed and scope.
And I'd just like to offer, I am totally unqualified to answer your question. Because I work in cybersecurity and my world is very narrow. But there is a woman in the audience who can answer your question very well, so I hope that you'll let me introduce you to Kristen after this, because she does digital transformation work for organizations, large and small. And so she will have the other answers and can actually help you in that project.
So when we had this list of skills too, some of it depends on where the skills that they currently have. We made some assumptions here, I think, about what people had and what they need. And what we've also said is they need to be able to check all those boxes to be the most competitive. And it kind of depends on what they have. I'm going to push back slightly. I think that algorithmic thinking, whether it's not this particular coding language or another coding language, helps understand what's going on inside of any of these models. And so I hope that there's still a bit there. Please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Karen, you mentioned two words that really hit me. And just because I did extensive research on that, lifelong learning. And you hit it right there. And also, we all know that population everywhere, people are living longer. So we kind of have to prepare for it. But, it's just, I guess I want to get from you, if you don't mind, and I promise I'm going to quote you from now on.
Oh my gosh.
Your advice to better convince organizations to invest in lifelong learning strategies, because it seems like, sometimes it's like it's just out of the question. And also, lifelong learning is tied with aging process. We are older than 30 minutes ago. So.
Thank you.
Not me.
Well, it's reality, right? Like a minute ago. So we're all hearing, we're going to be in the process of aging. So what is the best advice, and this goes to the panel, the investing, number one, on lifelong learning, particularly for you, because you mentioned it, and that ties with the aging population, looking up into the future and how to better invest. We like to talk about upskilling, reskilling, adapting, but guess what? People do all the check marks at age 50 and go face the labor market. Mm-hmm. You're gonna get discriminated against age. So what's the point?
Yeah, all right. We could have a whole seminar on that. And we're doing actually a lot of work to understand how boomers are behaving in the labor market right now, because I sort of had I had sort of the same sense, at least in the US. I don't know it to be a fact, but I was like, it seems really hard for older workers to get back in. One of the things that we've seen is older workers have been unretiring themselves quite quickly, on our platform at least, and they also apply to many more jobs on average than millennials or Gen Z or Gen X. So what this tells me when they apply to more jobs per session is they are more intensively job seeking, which could be a sign of, hey, I want to cast my net wide, I have a lot of skills, or hey, I'm struggling to find that right thing. And I suspect it might be the latter, that they're struggling. So I just want to affirm what you're saying. I can't say, oh yeah, definitely is the case, but we see evidence of this. Job searching intensity is much higher amongst boomers, which is sort of odd and unusual. I think it's an unretirement thing that's happening. But to your point about lifelong learning, really quickly, I do think it's a thing that's going to carry us through, like adaptability, through this technological moment that we're going through, and we'll go through others. I think the problem is that companies are short-termist in their focus. And it's not a problem, but that's just where they are. Also, any skill we have is portable, so whatever you invest in me, I will go and take it to my next role. I've had a few, you heard my bio. So there's some incentives that aren't totally aligned with this investment in lifelong learning. So what we need to do is figure out how to show that lifelong learning creates someone who's more curious, more adaptable, and therefore somehow more productive. And I can't say that I have evidence of that, but I think that's how you get over that big gulf you just talked about.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's inconsistent, amongst our panel here, in that earlier you and I were talking about how quickly people are, how short people's job spans are, and there's a lot of rapid change in those. At the same time, we said, no, this sort of teaching is happening within companies. And you pointed out that inconsistency of the short-term versus long-term thinking, and that those skills are portable. That's a tough problem. And we're relying on the corporation world to do that, and not regulation or education might not be a way that we have to pull in policy and regulation to do that. Other questions? Please.
Thanks. So I'm wondering, I mean, some of the elements of this, of the last couple of years have felt a little bit like when I was very young and you had, the move from DOS to Windows, from the command line to
Miss CPM.
Suddenly you have applications. So, and you can see that a little bit with early generative AI to putting a wrapper around that and calling it ChatGPT. And then prompt engineering was a big thing for a little bit, but suddenly a lot of the tools being offered kind of take another wrapper around what the prompt engineers were doing and turning that into a tool to make it easier. I mean, if that's a usable analogy, to what extent are you concerned, or do you think that maybe some of the skills that look like they could be very valuable right now might actually turn into a packaged tool that will then lead to another set of skills that we might need to use as we're sort of going back and forth between what the AI can do and what a human can do.
The half-life of skills is declining.
Yeah, half-life of skills is declining. But to Katya's point, you use the term adaptability. I call it learning agility. That's not something that you're going to wrap into a tool, right? And even if you do, if someone is agile and adaptable, they will adapt to that and move on to the next. So when we talk about the critical skills of creative thinking, of systems thinking, of design thinking, of adaptability and learning agility, I really do think those are the critical skills. Now,
those feel more enduring than prompt engineering.
Yeah, more enduring and more core to who we are as people and who we are as humanity. Now, there has to be some sort of digital baseline knowledge to use these systems, but at the end of the day, even if we wrap package into package into package of automating, creating prompts, and then integrating data flow into the AI tool, and then having the AI tool actually act as a principal, not just an what have you, the worker that is adaptable, the worker that is creative, that has design thinking, systems thinking innate to the way they work, will take that tool and make it sing and make it do something unexpected, which you can't automate that.
And I would argue, sorry, I'm going to jump in. I would argue also understanding the data, like all these algorithms are built on data. So whoever is controlling the data or has access to the data has, superior access to understanding everything. So if you understand how the black box works and you understand what's going into the black box, you have an advantage. So I still am a believer in the data. I might be saying that because I'm sitting on a lot of data, so I'm like, ooh. But I think that there's something there, too, that will never go away. Being numerate, understanding statistics and distributions and probability, and understanding what your data might be able to tell you or what it might not be able to tell you at great scale of millions and millions of observations, I think that's still super useful, even if you're having some algorithm crunch it all and tell you something. Anyway, sorry.
Analytical skills, absolutely.
Analytical skills.
Please.
Sam, we want to give some attention to the people online.
Oh, okay,
and we were
sorry.
getting lots of comments from them, so I just wanted to raise one question that we got. What happens if AI development outpaces the average human adaptability? Will we see widening gaps in digital literacy? There already are gaps present.
It will outpace, it already has outpaced the average human's adaptability. I think that is kind of the problem, right? Human performance, again, is a spectrum. It's not evenly distributed. So I think it has outpaced the average. And those who are above average are performing, and winner takes all economy, so they are the ones taking advantage of it. And how do we, as a society, manage the other half that are falling behind, right? To me, that is the critical question, which I don't have an answer to, by the way. I don't have that answer, but I do think it is already outpacing.
Reply back to get us the answer on that.
Yeah.
It's tough. The pace is brutal in these technologies.
Yeah, but I think we are giving a lot of credit when in fact it's statistical probability, it's not real reasoning. So is it outpacing? In some ways, yes. But is it in line with human, truly human reasoning, creativity, thinking? I don't know. Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind
To
of
be
like a
determined.
calculator, right? It's doing
Yes.
things a lot faster. It's synthesizing
Yes.
more information. But is it asking the right questions? I talk to a lot of journalists, and I'm always like, oh, where am I on this chart of disrupted to augmented? Am I in the journal? And I'm like, no, as long as you're asking good, hard questions, I don't see why I would ever not want to see a great journalist asking hard questions. And I'm not sure AI is designed to ask really good, hard questions. So I know that's kind of my stock answer for I don't think these roles are going to go away.
Yeah. The problem is it simulates humanity, but it's not human.
No, I agree.
You have more? Okay, sorry. I'll get maybe one more time.
So thank you. So earlier you mentioned that it's really important to show the skill of adaptability and lifelong learning. So there's two questions. First, how do a worker demonstrate that they are a lifelong learner to their employer or manager? And second, if for managers, how do they measure and look for people who can demonstrate adaptability and lifelong learning?
I love the question, busting the vagueness of the terms and
I wasn't being vague.
I'm in the process of hiring a woman that I find incredibly impressive because we've had probably 5 or 6 hour-long conversations, and maybe 75% of them we've talked about knitting and crocheting because that is what she's passionate about. And so we're talking about things that she's genuinely excited about and how she has innovated and created opportunities and built a community around something that has absolutely nothing to do with what my business does. And that has taught me that she is creative and adaptable and curious. Right? And to me, I'd rather hire someone that doesn't know a thing about cybersecurity, but is curious, adaptable, and creative and has other passions outside of that. And so I think that's one way that a worker can demonstrate that. Now, how do you get in the door and start that conversation? I can't help you there.
LinkedIn can help.
LinkedIn can help. There you go. But in terms of having those conversations, it's being human. It's talking and asking questions and being engaged and interested and expressing more than just this is the skills and technical requirements for this specific role. It's saying, hey, here are my values as a human being. Here are my interests as a human being. Maybe we can talk about some of them. And for me, as someone who hires people, I mean, that I hire that person 10 times out of 10.
And it has to be genuine. It's not about demonstrating. It's about being. I agree. It's much easier to teach technical skills than it is to teach attitude. I would hire attitude over technical skills any day. But I remember my first day in a graduate program, having just come from Bulgaria into the US and completely awestruck and confused. And I remember the dean then saying, you all own your education. You are responsible for it. And so the same holds true now. You're responsible for your career. You're responsible for your lifelong learning. You have to make it happen, and it has to be genuine.
I would add, I totally agree with what you both said. I would add that for me, it's the abstract thinking. I don't need help with a problem that I know we've all somehow been trained on at school. I need help with a problem where I'm like, I don't know, we've never been here before. And I had one of those problems in 2008 when someone came to me and was like, well, what are we thinking? Should we buy treasuries or mortgages? We were at the Fed and we're like, maybe both? I don't know, And it wasn't that I decided that was someone more senior, but we were all trying to figure that out together. What would it mean if we bought treasuries or mortgages during this huge crisis? What are all the unknown and unintended consequences? So we just pulled a bunch of people who were good at abstract thinking and problem solving, and we just said, okay, what's your thought? Your thought, let's figure this out. So for me, it's that abstract problem solving that I really value, and I don't see generative AI doing that anytime soon.
Technical problems you can solve with enough caffeine and pizza, right? And it's the abstract ones that are more difficult. This has been fascinating. One of the numbers from our research is that 73% of the people out there are excited and hope that AI will do part of their job. There's a lot of negatives here. Only 37% said they were fearful about AI. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I hope that we've ended on an opportunistic note here. And now we can head for some snacks. I think we have a snack break until, when is the snack break until? The next half hour, right? Yep, so snack break until 4:30. Am I reading that right? Yep, okay, snack break until 4:30, and then we'll come back for the last panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.